Okay, so today we're diving into something pretty big. Um, Civil disobedience.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, right? Huge moments in history. The Boston Tea Party, Gandhi and the Salt, even the sit-ins during the Civil Rights Movement. These weren't just people disagreeing. This was breaking the law on purpose, but with a goal.
Yeah, and for this deep dive, we're really going to try to get at the core of what civil disobedience is. Like, imagine you're explaining it to a philosopher, right?
Yeah.
You'd want to hit those essential elements.
Exactly. And not just what it is, but like, is it ever right to do it? What are the arguments for and against? We're going to unpack all that using the Stanford Encyclopedia of
Yeah,
Philosophy.
yeah, we're going deep on this one.
It's like the ultimate breakdown. Definition, key features, when it's okay, when it's not. What should governments even do about it? We're covering it all.
So, starting point. Got to have a definition. What's the one we're working with?
So the encyclopedia gives this really common one. It's about publicly breaking the law. Has to be nonviolent, and it's got to be based on what you believe, like a moral or political stance.
Yeah, the conscientious part, right. It's not just being a rebel. This is deeper. And the encyclopedia even says usually you're punished for the act itself. Like if you're blocking traffic, it's the blocking, not some extra civil disobedience charge.
Right. You're not getting like a bonus punishment just for the philosophy behind it. And that leads to another important thing. They talk about direct versus indirect disobedience.
Oh, that's interesting. Can you unpack that for us?
Sure. So direct disobedience.
Yeah.
You're breaking the exact law you disagree with, like Rosa Parks refusing to give up her seat on the bus. That law is segregation. But then there's indirect.
Yeah, like what?
Okay, think Vietnam War protests.
Yeah.
People blocking streets, right? They're not breaking a war law directly, but using that action to speak out against the war. The encyclopedia points out direct is often important for legal challenges, like going to court. But indirect, sometimes it's your only option.
Can't exactly fight a war by, well, starting another one on your own.
Exactly. Now, another point the encyclopedia brings up, it's got to be principled. This is where it gets sticky because they contrast it with regular crime, right? Usually, crime is about personal gain. But what about those not in my backyard protests?
Oh, yeah, the NIMBY stuff. How does that fit into the whole principle thing? It seems kind of selfish.
It's tricky, right? Some people argue that self-interest kind of ruins the moral high ground. But here's what the encyclopedia says. If you're from a marginalized group fighting for basic living conditions, it's not just self-interest. It's about basic human rights. The sincerity, the depth of belief, that seems to be key.
Makes sense. It's different from, I don't know, wanting a lower property tax just cause.
Right, but then it gets even weirder when you think about, like, Anonymous, the hacker group. They do stuff for lulz. That's about loss, right? So is that serious enough to be civil disobedience? Really makes you think about how we define serious moral belief.
All right, on to civility. That word feels pretty loaded when we talk about civil disobedience.
For sure. The encyclopedia mostly sees it as meaning self-restraint, which, let's face it, any society kind of needs. And they break this down into different parts. First one is communication.
Okay, so for our philosopher friend, why is communication so important here?
Think about it.
Uh-huh.
Civil disobedience. You want to be heard. You want people to know why you're doing what you're doing. A bank robber. They're doing the opposite.
Yeah, sneaky, quiet.
Right? Civil disobedience, it's like a statement, like symbolic speech,
Yeah.
arguing for change, but in this really public way. It's about appealing to a shared idea of what's right. Almost like an argument you're acting out, right?
Right,
Well-
right. But there's another kind of principled action where that's not the main goal, like say someone's hiding refugees.
Totally. Risky, based on belief. But the communication isn't the point. They're just trying to help.
Okay, so then there's publicity. The encyclopedia gets pretty specific here. Openness, not hiding who you are, sometimes even giving a heads up, and taking responsibility. That's a lot.
It is. But think of it as transparency. You want people to see this is civil disobedience, this is who's doing it, this is what we stand for. It's about standing up publicly. But heads up, that's where it gets debated. Some say if it's about communication, why risk getting shut down before you communicate?
True. Like if you want to protest inside a building, telling them first, well, they're just going to lock the doors.
Exactly. And then the encyclopedia gets into covert actions like Snowden and those leaks. Can those be civil disobedience if you only take credit later?
It's like, does the when matter? For our philosopher, is it still the same thing?
It's a tough one. Some people say as long as you eventually own up, the intent is still there. The encyclopedia calls this self-identification after the fact. But a lot of people hesitate to call secret stuff civil disobedience. Sometimes they use uncivil disobedience, which then opens up a whole other can of worms. Like, what is civility anyway?
Mm.
But it's not saying the act itself was good or bad,
Ugh.
just different.
Okay, big one now. Nonviolence. This feels like the classic rule, right?
Mm.
Like, if you get violent, the message gets messed up. You can't appeal to justice if you're being unjust.
Yeah, it changes things.
Yeah.
Instead of persuasion, now you're forcing people. Rawls even said violence just doesn't fit with how civil disobedience is supposed to work. You're trying to get to people's minds, their morals.
Mm.
But there are critics. They say violence itself is a loaded term.
Yeah.
Calling something violent can be a way to just dismiss it, no matter what actually happened.
And then you have the issue of, like, what counts as violence? Physical harm, sure. But what about the psychological stuff? Or even if you do something nonviolent that leads to bad consequences, like a strike that hurts people financially.
Right, it gets complicated. And then property damage, where does that fit in?
Oh, yeah, that's a tough one. Does breaking a window make you violent?
Yeah.
Philosophically speaking, how do we even categorize that?
So the traditional view, the liberal one, property damage is bad like violence,
Mm.
draws on that lock-in idea of property being an extension of yourself, right?
Yeah.
But the encyclopedia points out there's a difference between, say, burning a draft card and burning down a building to scare people,
Huge difference.
right? Some folks think property damage needs its own category. Not quite violent, not quite nonviolent. Others say, okay, maybe minor damage if it's symbolic and tied to the message, like a more extreme way of communicating. Philosophically, that gets us thinking about what property means to us and how actions can be harmful in different ways or be meaningful in different ways.
And then the really tough one, what about harming yourself? Hunger strikes, self-immolation.
Yeah. The encyclopedia talked about how theorists don't really analyze self-harm that much, even though hunger strikes get brought up a lot. Gandhi is the exception. He had this whole system. Like, a coercive hunger strike is different from one that's purely moral. And for him, even self-immolation could be nonviolent, depending on the person's intentions. Philosophically, it makes you question, where's the line between harming yourself and making, like, the ultimate sacrifice for what you believe in? Really heavy stuff.
It really is. And last point on nonviolence. The encyclopedia talks about persuasion versus coercion. The classic idea is that civil disobedience is all about persuasion. Appeal to people's better nature, right? But is it always that simple?
Well, Martin Luther King Jr., he argued for something called nonviolent coercion, like the bus boycott in Montgomery. No violence, but the goal is economic pressure to force them to the table. Appealing to conscience might not be enough, he realized.
Makes sense. Sometimes you got to hit people where it hurts.
Right, and that's the question, philosophically. When does nonviolent action become so disruptive that it's not persuasion anymore, it's force? And is that okay?
Okay, moving on. We've got non-evasion. So the idea here, I think, is that by accepting the consequences, even getting arrested, it shows you actually respect the law, even while breaking a specific one.
Yeah, that's the classic take. If you run or fight back, it's just defiance. But if you accept it, it shows your issue is serious. But the encyclopedia is careful to point out, not everyone agrees on what non-evasion means exactly.
Oh, how so?
Well, does it just mean letting them arrest you? Or does it mean pleading guilty too? Some people say, nah, plead not guilty, then use the trial to explain why you did it. It's a chance to get the message out, maybe even get the jury to side with you.
I mean, a trial is super public.
Huge platform. And philosophically makes you wonder, is accepting punishment the only way to show respect for the law? Maybe using the system itself to fight back is a form of respect too.
Okay, next. Decorum. Basically, be respectful, follow social norms even while protesting. Does that really matter, philosophically?
It's a big debate. Some say, yeah, decorum keeps things orderly so people can actually hear you. You don't want to alienate potential supporters. But others say, wait, what if those norms are part of the problem? For some groups, anger, strong language, rejecting those norms, that is their message. The encyclopedia uses Pussy Riot, Black Lives Matter, as examples, called uncivil because they shook things up.
Yeah, sometimes you got to be loud to be heard.
Right. And philosophically, it makes you ask, whose idea of respectable even matters? And is demanding that always fair?
Good point. And that kind of leads into fidelity to law, which is our last one here. The idea is that being civil, especially accepting the consequences, shows you actually respect the system overall, right? Like, deep down, you're not against all laws.
That's the traditional link.
Uh,
But Critics say, hold on, maybe people are doing civil disobedience for strategic reasons. Like, it just works better, not because they love the legal system.
Yeah.
It's led to this whole anti-legal turn and how people think about it.
Mm.
The focus is more on communication, reaching the public, less about respecting the law itself.
And there's also that critical turn, right, where people say the old way of seeing civil disobedience, it kind of helps the powerful stay in power.
Exactly. It can accidentally reinforce the system you're trying to change. So for our philosopher, it gets messy. Breaking one law doesn't necessarily tell you how someone feels about the whole system, right?
Really makes you think. Now, the encyclopedia goes on to compare civil disobedience with other types of protest. Is that really important to distinguish, like, from a philosophy point of view?
I think so.
Yeah.
Each type has a different goal, different ethics, different implications. Understanding the differences helps us see what's unique about civil disobedience, why it's justified or not.
Makes sense. Okay, so first up, how is it different from just regular legal protest? Where's the philosophical dividing line?
The biggest difference is that law-breaking part, right?
Hmm.
Legal protest stays within the lines.
Yeah.
But philosophically, they both want to express disagreement, push for change. It's when you feel like working within the system isn't enough that it shifts.
So it's about when those legal means fail you.
Right. Then there's this thing called rule departures, which the encyclopedia talks about. It's when officials do it, people inside the system. Kind of similar, but different actors. Philosophically, how do those compare?
Yeah, that's interesting.
So rule departures, it's people going against the rules they're supposed to be upholding, right?
Mm.
Maybe bending them, maybe breaking them, but from within. Like jury nullification is a good example.
Oh, yeah, where jurors basically refuse to follow the law.
Right. Because they think it's unjust, so they use their position to go against it.
Right.
Philosophically, that's a gray area. Is your personal morality more important than your duty to the system? Tough call.
Definitely. And then there's conscientious objection. We hear that a lot with like military service and stuff. How does that relate to civil disobedience? It feels personal, right?
Yeah, it's about refusing to do something specific based on your personal beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I won't fight in this war because I believe it's wrong. Philosophically, it's about your moral integrity, not being forced to do something you think is evil. So it's similar to civil disobedience, but it's often more individual, less about making a public statement. But not always. The encyclopedia brings up Thoreau refusing to pay taxes.
Yeah.
That was definitely public.
Right. Went to jail for it. Right.
Yeah. So there's that blur again. Philosophically, it shows that tension between what you believe and what the state demands.
Okay. The encyclopedia also talks about newer forms of this stuff, immigration disobedience and digital disobedience. Do those challenge how we think about it, like from a philosophy standpoint?
Oh, big time. Immigration disobedience is about breaking immigration laws to protest those laws. It raises questions about the rights of migrants, what states are obligated to do, even the whole idea of borders, and then digital.
Yeah.
That's everything from hacking to using tech to get around censorship.
Like a whole different world.
And it makes those old criteria hard to apply. What's violence online, right? Or what does public even mean when things can spread globally but also be totally anonymous? Philosophically, it forces us to rethink the basics. Those core ideas of civil disobedience need an update.
Makes sense. And then we've got this category of uncivil disobedience. It feels kind of broad, right? Why even have a term like that, philosophically speaking?
I think it's important because not everything fits neatly into that civil box, right?
Mhm.
You're acknowledging there are actions that are maybe secret, maybe use violence or refuse to play by the rules, maybe even offend people, but are they justified? Uncivil disobedience doesn't answer that, but it makes us look at it.
Yeah.
It says maybe our definition is too narrow, maybe we need to consider a wider range of actions.
It's about keeping an open mind, right? Not just dismissing things because they don't fit the mold.
Exactly. And last one in this comparison section, we've got revolutionary action. So what's the big difference there? The intent. Civil disobedience versus actually trying to overthrow the government.
Pretty big difference, I'd say.
It is. Civil disobedience.
Mm.
You want to change things from within the system. You're saying the system itself is mostly okay, just needs tweaking. Revolution. You think the whole thing is rotten, got to start over. Philosophically, revolution usually gets justified with just war theory. How bad is the situation? If we tried everything else, a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, much higher stakes. All right, this has been helpful, seeing where civil disobedience fits in the grand scheme of things. Now, the big question, and the debate philosophers love, when is civil disobedience justified? The encyclopedia starts by laying out the problem of disobedience. What's the problem exactly?
Well, traditionally, Philosophers say in a decent society, you've got a moral duty to obey the law. They call it political obligation. So if you break that, even for a good reason, you'd better have a really good reason.
Mm.
There are worries about the rule of law breaking down, society going into chaos. And some say if laws were made democratically, disobeying them is undemocratic.
Yeah, you're going against the will of the people.
Exactly. But then there's this thing called the anarchist turn in philosophy, more recent stuff. And it challenges that whole problem of disobedience idea.
Oh, house.
Anarchists, they basically question whether we have a duty to obey in the first place. Authority itself is the problem, they say. What you should follow is your conscience, your sense of justice. So from that view, it's not about justifying civil disobedience. It's about the state justifying its laws.
Flipping the script. I like it.
Right. Some even say you have this two-part duty, obey or disobey civilly when the law goes against justice.
Okay, so putting aside that big debate for a second, what are some actual conditions for when it's okay to do civil disobedience? The encyclopedia talks about Rawls. He's pretty influential, right? What were his rules?
Yeah, Rawls is a big name. He was working within the idea of a pretty just society, not a complete tyranny. And he had a few conditions. One, the injustice has got to be serious, not just a minor annoyance. And it's got to be going on for a while, like a clear violation of basic rights. Two, you've got to have tried everything else first, all the legal, political ways to change it, exhausted. And three, if there are multiple groups with the same complaint, they should work together.
Makes sense. More organized, more impact.
Yeah, that was his thinking. Philosophically, Rawls wanted to allow for dissent without blowing up the whole system, keep things stable.
But those conditions have gotten some pushback, haven't they?
Oh yeah, plenty. Some say focusing on widely accepted ideas of justice leaves out the more radical groups, the ones who are ahead of their time. What if your view isn't mainstream yet? And that last resort thing. When do you know you've truly tried everything? Plus, that coordination requirement, it could punish people who are acting alone but doing what they think is right.
Yeah, they're taking a stand even if nobody else is.
Exactly. It's that tension, right? Wanting clear rules, but also acknowledging that social movements are messy. They don't always follow the rule book.
For sure. The encyclopedia also talks about this idea that it's only justified if it'll work. You got to have a chance of actually changing things. But are there arguments against that, philosophically?
Yeah, lots of them. Some philosophers say whether an action is right shouldn't depend on if you win. Even if you probably won't change things immediately, civil disobedience can be about showing the world the injustice, making people aware, standing in solidarity with the oppressed. It's about moral consistency, doing the right thing even if it's hard. Plus, that idea that it's always divisive and leads to more lawbreaking, that's debatable.
Okay, fair enough. So besides those specific conditions, the encyclopedia talks about the value civil disobedience brings. It can be justice enhancing and legitimacy enhancing. Wait, how does breaking the law do that?
Think of it as a course correction, all right? Civil disobedience, it points out the problems in the system, it sparks debate, forces people to pay attention. Habermas, the philosopher, he said it's crucial for a healthy democracy. People need to push back sometimes, keep things in check, and that actually makes the system stronger because it shows there's space for dissent, right?
So it's like it shows the system is flexible, can adapt.
Exactly. And different branches of democratic theory look at this value in different ways, like deliberative Democrats. They see it as a way for those who are usually silenced to be heard. Republican theorists, they're all about civic duty, people being active participants. And radical Democrats, they focus on challenging power structures. All these views see civil disobedience as a good thing for democracy, not a threat. It's about people having power, especially those who are often ignored.
Interesting how different theories focus on different aspects. Now, what about the political realist perspective? They see things a bit differently, right? What's their philosophical take on the value of this stuff?
Realists, they're less about ideals and more about, well, reality. Power, conflict, all that. They see civil disobedience as a tool. Like Andrew Sable, he calls it a political technology. It's how groups pressure the system, change who benefits and who loses. It's not just about morals for them.
So it's more about strategy, getting results.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Karuna Mantena, she studied Gandhi and King. Turns out their nonviolence wasn't just ethical, it was effective. That's where realism comes in. It adds that layer of pragmatism.
It's not naive. It's about understanding how things really work.
Right. And it seems like lately philosophers are looking more at real-world examples, learning from actual movements. That bottom-up approach, what does that mean for how we think about civil disobedience, philosophically speaking?
Yeah, big question.
It's like this. Instead of having these big theories and trying to apply them downward, now we're looking at what people actually do. We're seeing the wisdom, the strategies, of real activists,
Hmm.
less about judgment, more about understanding.
Learning from the people on the ground.
Exactly. And that also affects how we think about the right to civil disobedience itself. Some argue it should be a right because dissent is so valuable in a democracy.
That makes sense. Okay, final part. How should the state respond to this? What are they supposed to do with people breaking the law, even if it's for what they think is a good reason? The encyclopedia puts this in the context of what criminal law is even for. So, philosophically, what are the goals of our legal system?
That's a big question. Different people have different answers, but generally it's about punishing wrongdoing, right? Making sure people don't do it again, rehabilitating offenders, showing what society thinks is wrong, and keeping the peace. So when the state deals with civil disobedience, they're drawing on all those ideas. And their response kind of tells you what they think is most important.
So, it's about priorities.
Totally. And some people say, treat them the same as any other criminal. Why? Philosophically, it's about equality before the law. A broken law is a broken law. Motive doesn't matter. If we make exceptions, things get too subjective, could weaken the whole system. And there's the slippery slope worry. Today it's civil disobedience. Tomorrow everyone's got a moral reason to break the law.
Yeah, anarchy.
Right. But then others say, no, punish them harder. Why?
Okay, why? That seems counterintuitive.
Because, they say, civil disobedience is a direct attack on the state, on democracy. And it's public, so it could inspire others to do the same. It's a bigger threat to order, so it needs a bigger response. Philosophically, it's all about protecting the system.
Keeping things stable.
Right. But then, remember we talked about the value of civil disobedience. Well, some say, if it's so valuable, go easy on them.
Yeah, if it helps society, why punish it harshly?
Exactly. The thinking is, punishing it too much will silence dissent, and that's bad for democracy. Dworkin, the legal scholar, he said the state has a duty to actually protect civil disobedience. Like, the prosecutors, the judges, they should show restraint.
Interesting. But the encyclopedia brings up a problem with that, right? It could get biased.
Oh, yeah. If it's all up to individual judges, you might get different outcomes depending on who the judge is, what cause it is. Some people say we need clearer rules so it's not so arbitrary. Others say let's have a public debate, get the legislature to decide how to deal with it.
So it's about finding that balance.
Right. Being flexible enough to handle these unique situations where people are acting on their conscience, but also making sure the law is applied fairly, predictably.
It can't just be random. Okay, final concept here. The right to civil disobedience. Philosophers love this one. So what are the different ways they think about such a right?
Oh, lots of ways. Rawls, he only believed there's a right if it meets those conditions we talked about. Got to be justified. Dworkin had this idea of a right to break the law, but it's weaker. It's based on basic rights like freedom of conscience. He said, the state can still punish you, but you've got a moral right to act on your beliefs.
So the state can punish the act, but not the belief behind it.
Exactly. Then there's Raz. He said this right is like a protected zone for political action. Super important in places where you don't have other ways to participate. Lefkowitz tied it to ongoing political participation. It's not over just because a law was passed, you know. And Brownlee said it's about the right to object based on what you deeply believe.
So many different angles.
Right. It's all about how individual rights clash with state power and where dissent fits into a just society.
Last point. The encyclopedia mentions accommodating civil disobedience. It's less about courts and punishment, more about what the police do on the ground. Philosophically, what does it mean to accommodate something that's, well, illegal?
It means the state, especially the police, should try to de-escalate, talk to the protesters, protect their rights, even though they're technically breaking the law. It's the opposite of just cracking down, arresting everyone.
So it's about being, I don't know, more understanding.
Exactly. Smith talks about this policing philosophy, and Brownlee wants legal defenses for protesters. It's about acknowledging that maybe, sometimes, breaking the law is doing something good, and the state should handle it carefully.
Wow, okay. I think we've officially gone deep. This has been a lot. Definition, types of protest, when it's okay, when it's not, what the state should do. We've really gotten into the philosophy of civil disobedience. And it's clear this stuff is super relevant today.
It really is. It's like from those ancient Greek guys arguing about unjust laws to today with all the online activism and everything. Civil disobedience is still how we figure out the relationship between us, the government, and how to make a better world.
Big questions. So, listener, out of all this, what sticks with you? What about civil disobedience is the most interesting or the most difficult to wrap your head around?
And here's a final thought to ponder. With all these different views, What do you think are the most important ethical things to consider if you're thinking about doing civil disobedience? And for a society that wants to be just, how do we balance authority with allowing people to disagree, even break the rules sometimes, if it might lead to real change?
Yeah, stuff to think about.
Big stuff.
And that's our deep dive for today. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for having me.